Life in the Chicago suburbs always seemed so peaceful to me. The noise of the big city was far away, and our home with Jack became a symbol of stability and routine. On the surface, we had the perfect marriage, good jobs, a cozy house, and no major arguments. But in reality, this stability felt more like stagnant routine. Jack was completely absorbed in his career, and our conversations had increasingly boiled down to brief discussions about daily matters. I had long felt that the spark between us had faded. The warmth we once felt for each other had vanished, like morning mist. We became like two neighbors living in the same house, but each in their own world. Jack would come home late, exhausted, throw a couple of obligatory phrases, and immediately head to bed. In those moments, I felt completely lost. At night, I stared at the ceiling, asking myself questions I couldn't find answers to. But everything changed one ordinary evening. Jack walked into the kitchen and announced news that caught me off guard. "Michael is coming to stay with us for a few weeks. He's got work in Chicago and has nowhere to stay." Michael, his nephew. I hadn't seen him in years. I couldn't even remember how long it had been since his last visit. He used to be an awkward teenager, and now I didn't know what to expect. But something inside me stirred at the thought of his arrival. I couldn't explain why, but this news made me feel uneasy. Michael arrived a few days later, just as planned. I stepped out to meet him at the door, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing before me was a tall, confident young man. I remembered him so differently, an awkward teenager with clumsy movements and a shy smile. But now, he looked so different. His movements were poised, his posture straight, and his gaze steady and calm. We exchanged formal greetings, but I couldn't shake the feeling of surprise. How quickly he had changed. He stepped inside, and I, trying to hide my inner turmoil, led him to the terrace. That evening, we had dinner outdoors. Jack, as always, talked about work, about his new project that consumed his days and nights. Michael sat across from me, politely listening. I tried my best to act casual, but every time our eyes met, I felt a strange warmth rising inside me. When dinner ended, Jack retreated to his office, and Michael suggested we stay on the terrace. We sat in silence, listening to the evening breeze. His presence felt unusual, too close. Michael spoke first, reminiscing about the times he used to visit us during his youth. I smiled, trying not to reveal my thoughts, but every look he gave me, every word, seemed to awaken something inside me, something I had long forgotten. I felt my heart racing, but I did everything I could to hide my growing interest. It all felt wrong. I was married to Jack, and Michael was his nephew. But why couldn't I stop thinking about how much he had changed? Every day, Michael seemed to grow closer. He lingered around longer than necessary, offering help with small tasks or casually asking how I spent my time. At first, I thought it was just politeness, but then I started to notice. His glances, his compliments, they were too personal. "You look wonderful today," he said one day while I was dressed in simple home clothes. Those words made my heart race. In the past, I wouldn't have paid much attention to it, but now there was a different undertone in his voice. Michael started to stay close to me more often, whether by accident or on purpose. I noticed his presence in every little detail, the way he threw fleeting glances at me, or how he stood a little too close. Sometimes our hands would brush against each other, and a small electric charge would pass through me from just that touch. I couldn't understand what was happening. Why did I feel like I was losing control every time he was near? His compliments became more intimate and his glances more lingering. He often talked about how comfortable he felt in our home and how spending time here reminded him of his younger days. His words sounded innocent, but I sensed a hidden meaning behind them. More and more often, I recalled how he used to be an awkward teenager, uncertain of himself. Back then, his interest in me seemed naive, even endearing. But now, he had grown into a man, and his behavior was impossible to overlook. One evening, when Jack went to his office to work, Michael and I found ourselves alone on the terrace again. The conversation started slowly, but I soon noticed that his words and questions became more personal. He asked me if I was happy in my marriage with Jack, a question that made me freeze. It was too direct, but there was no judgment in his voice, only genuine curiosity. I tried to brush it off with a joke. but something inside me told me that this was the beginning of a dangerous game, one I had unknowingly entered. Each time our eyes met, I felt the tension between us grow stronger. I tried to suppress those feelings, but they were only intensifying. What had started as innocent conversations had gradually evolved into something more, and I could no longer ignore it. Time passed, and Jack became increasingly absorbed in his work. His projects demanded not only long hours at the office, but frequent business trips as well. I barely saw him at home, and when he was there, his mind was always elsewhere. This gave Michael and me more and more opportunities to spend time together. At first, it was just brief walks around the neighborhood, simply to get some fresh air. But soon our meetings became more frequent. One day, Michael suggested we visit a cafe I had never been to before. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, far from the bustling streets. We sat there in silence, enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. The conversation started with small talk, but there was always a depth to his words, as if he wanted to share more. His openness surprised me. Michael began to speak about his life, about how he felt lonely despite his work and friends. I listened to him, and with every word I felt something between us growing, something more than just friendship. He spoke with such honesty that I sometimes found myself lost in my thoughts. I realized that he wasn't just confiding in me as a woman, but as someone who truly understood him. In one of our conversations, he asked me about my feelings. It was an indirect question, but its meaning was clear. I tried to evade, saying that I was happy with Jack. However, each time Michael and I met, it became harder to maintain that boundary that separated our connection from something deeper. I began to doubt whether our relationship could remain purely platonic. It had already become something much more complicated. Michael's words, his smile, even his glances, they all stirred conflicting emotions within me. And the most important thing was, I didn't know what to do with them. Deep down, I understood that soon the line would be crossed. The evening came when Jack left for another business trip. He told me he would be gone for a few days, leaving me alone in the house with Michael. The evening started off quietly. We sat in the living room talking, with music playing softly in the background. At first, the conversation was light, but soon it shifted to something more personal. Michael began to talk about how hard it had been for him to deal with loneliness, how he felt that something important was missing in his life. His words touched something deep inside me, something long forgotten. I opened up too. We talked about the past, about unfulfilled dreams, about how often life turns out completely different from what we expected. With each word, I felt the invisible boundaries between us slowly fading away. His gaze became more intense, his voice lower and calmer. At some point, I realized I could no longer ignore what was happening. We fell silent. Michael sat across from me, and in his eyes I saw what I had been afraid to acknowledge: desire, tension, the very emotion that had been growing between us for so long. I couldn't turn away, couldn't run. Everything happened in an instant. He moved toward me, our eyes met for the last time, and he kissed me. It was a moment we had both been waiting for far too long. That kiss was our first, and it shattered all boundaries. I didn't resist. His touch, his passion, it instantly filled the emptiness I had felt for years. We ended up in the bedroom. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to process how our closeness crossed every possible line. For the first time in many years, I felt truly alive. Every touch felt real, every word genuine. It was wrong, but at that moment all I could think about was how I finally felt something real. After that night, everything changed. Michael and I could no longer just be relatives or friends. Our relationship took on a new dimension. Secret, tense, but in its own way, thrilling. We looked for any opportunity to be alone, and with each meeting, this hidden game became more risky and exhilarating. We began meeting in secluded places, small cafes on the outskirts of town, parks where no one visited on weekdays, even quiet walks along the river. Each of these meetings was like a breath of fresh air. We were no longer just family tied by blood. Between us, a new bond had formed, pulling us closer with each passing day. At times, I forgot that this passion could destroy everything I had in my life. Every touch, every glance, every fleeting smile filled my days with meaning. Michael was becoming more than just an object of desire. He was becoming something much more important. I felt like I was living a double life. During the day, I was Jack's wife, fulfilling my usual duties, but in the evening, I was a woman with a secret, captivating and dangerous. Michael was with me, and I lived for these moments. With each new meeting, our connection grew stronger. We knew we were risking being discovered, but that only intensified our passion. There was an element of a game in our relationship where each new encounter was more dangerous than the last. Sometimes I found myself thinking that I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. What had started as innocent flirtation had become something much more, and each step we took brought us closer to the point where our secret would no longer remain hidden. Jack was the kind of person who noticed details. No matter how hard I tried to hide my anxiety, I couldn't avoid changes in my behavior. Over the past few weeks, I had become increasingly nervous, avoiding conversations and even trying not to meet his gaze. I knew that the secret meetings with Michael were starting to leave their mark on my daily life, and there was no way Jack wouldn't notice. Jack gradually started picking up on these changes. He didn't say anything outright, but I could see how his gaze grew sharper, as if he were analyzing every word I said, every move I made. I often left the house, pretending to meet friends or run errands, but every time I returned, I felt like Jack had noticed something. His silence became heavy, making me even more anxious. One day, as I was getting ready to leave for another meeting with Michael, Jack unexpectedly offered to drive me. It was in that moment that I realized he had started watching me. I declined, making up yet another excuse, but I saw the suspicion in his eyes. Jack was cautious. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something was already bothering him. Perhaps he didn't want to believe the worst, but his intuition told him that something was wrong. That evening, when I returned home, Jack was sitting in the living room, lost in thought. We barely spoke. I could feel that an invisible wall had grown between us. It was only a matter of time before he decided to test his suspicions, but for now, he kept all his doubts to himself, continuing to watch me without openly confronting me. His silence scared me the most. I knew that sooner or later he would figure everything out, and when that happened, everything I had been hiding would come to light. When Michael suggested we spend the night at his family's country house, I felt a mixture of emotions. On one hand, the idea was thrilling, a secluded place far from the city where we could be alone without fear of being seen. On the other hand, something inside me warned that it might be too risky. But as usual, passion and desire outweighed the voice of reason, and I agreed. The house was located outside the city, far from prying eyes. It was small but cozy, surrounded by trees, the perfect hideaway for the two of us. When we arrived, evening had just begun. The silence and tranquility of the place instantly put me at ease. Michael lit the fireplace, and soon we found ourselves on the couch in front of the fire, wrapped in warmth and isolation. It felt so far from the reality I lived in every day. We talked, as always, openly and without hesitation. I felt like I could trust him, that I could be myself with him. Our conversations soon turned into touches, then kisses, and finally into something more. I was completely immersed in the moment, thinking of nothing but being here and now with Michael. But beyond our secluded paradise, reality was creeping up unnoticed. I had no idea that Jack had been watching us for some time. He knew exactly what was happening and was preparing his trap. Simply exposing us wasn't enough for him. He wanted us both to feel completely vulnerable. He wasn't after just a scandal. He wanted to destroy our lives. This house, which I thought was our perfect refuge, was part of Jack's game. He had been waiting for his moment, watching our every move while we naively spent time together. It was only a matter of time before he decided to strike. That evening began just like any other time Michael and I were alone. We were at the country house, hidden away from everyone. I felt free, fully immersed in our passion, forgetting everything that existed beyond those walls. Over and over, we gave ourselves to the moment, confident that no one would find us. But everything changed in an instant. The door suddenly swung open, and Jack walked into the room. I froze, instantly realizing that all our secrets had been exposed. But the strangest part was that he didn't yell or make a scene. His face was cold and calm, which terrified me even more. Michael was also paralyzed with shock at Jack's unexpected appearance. Jack approached us slowly, never taking his eyes off me. There was no anger in his gaze, just cold calculation. "I've suspected for a while," he said quietly, his voice controlled. I couldn't respond. The words were stuck in my throat. He continued, "I wanted to be sure. And now that I know everything, we have a choice." His voice was so calm that I didn't immediately understand what he meant. "I forgive you," Jack said, looking directly into my eyes. But there was not a shred of sincerity in his voice. That forgiveness sounded like a sentence, and I knew what was coming next. This wasn't an act of mercy, but the beginning of something far more sinister, his manipulation. Jack would never let me go after this. He intended to use this forgiveness as a weapon to control me. I felt a cold fear grip my entire body. Everything that I thought was so secret and personal was now in Jack's hands, and I realized I had fallen into a trap. Michael stood beside me, unsure of what to do. And Jack, satisfied with his victory, left the room, leaving us in complete disarray. After that night, Jack began using his forgiveness as a weapon. His calmness had only been a mask, hiding his true intentions. Every conversation now inevitably returned to my betrayal. He didn't yell, didn't openly accuse me, but his words were like blows, each more painful and precise. "I've forgiven you," he would say. But that forgiveness felt like a reminder of my guilt, as if I had to pay for it constantly. He controlled my every move. Jack started asking questions about where I was going, who I was meeting. It seemed like he knew everything about me, even things I couldn't remember myself. When I came home, his gaze followed my every step, and I felt his invisible chains tightening around me more and more. In his presence, I couldn't be myself. Every word, every gesture was filled with fear and guilt. I tried to return to normal life, but Jack wouldn't allow it. He skillfully manipulated my feelings, making me suffer. In moments when I thought he had forgotten or decided to let it go, he would bring up my betrayal again, often casually, throwing out fleeting remarks that struck me to my core. These were subtle comments, but they were impossible to avoid. Every time I would be reminded of that moment at the country house, and the guilt became unbearable. I realized I had fallen into a psychological trap. Jack had no intention of letting me go. He decided I should suffer as long as he saw fit. I could see his control over my life growing stronger. He left me no chance to catch my breath. Every step I took, every decision I made, he coldly calculated, leaving me trapped in this emotional prison. But the worst part was that I couldn't leave. I was afraid of what would happen if I tried to break free. Afraid of his reaction, of his vengeance. Jack had become my jailer, and I knew I was trapped in a cage of my own making. With each passing day, I felt myself slipping away. Jack continued to control my every move, every gesture, and I was no longer the woman I once was. It felt like he was draining the last remnants of strength from me. I tried to hold on, but it became harder and harder with each passing day. I started doubting myself, my feelings, and my thoughts. My self-esteem slowly but surely crumbled. Jack never raised his voice, never yelled, but his manipulations were far more insidious. He made me feel guilty for every step I took, for every word I said. He reminded me that I had failed, that I had betrayed him. And though he claimed to have forgiven me, I knew that wasn't true. His forgiveness was a chain that bound me to him, making me suffer even more. I became dependent on his forgiveness. I found myself waiting for even the smallest sign of approval from him, as if it could restore my dignity. But instead, Jack only pushed me further into a corner. Every interaction between us was filled with tension. I felt trapped, unable to escape. Michael, too, began to notice how I was sinking deeper into the darkness. He felt guilty for what had happened. His eyes no longer sparkled like they used to. He rarely spoke to me openly, as if afraid that every word might make things worse. But what hurt the most was seeing Jack start to manipulate him as well. One evening at dinner, Jack coldly reminded Michael that he was part of the family's downfall. "You know this is on your conscience, right?" he said, almost casually. Michael froze, his face turned pale. He wanted to say something but couldn't. Jack skillfully pressed on the most painful points, turning Michael's life into a nightmare too. Like me, Michael was trapped in a prison of Jack's making, and neither of us knew how to escape it. My life had become an endless cycle of fear and guilt. Every day with Jack was like a new layer of torment, and I saw no way out. With each passing moment, I felt his control tighten over every aspect of my life. But I couldn't leave him either. Every time I thought about leaving, cold fear would grip me. Fear of his reaction, fear of the inevitable scandal that would follow. I knew Jack would never let me go so easily. Living under his constant control was becoming unbearable. He grew more attentive to my every action, every word. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, leaving everything behind, running away. It seemed like the most logical choice, but it felt impossible. I was terrified of what Jack might do. His manipulations had gone so far that I no longer believed I could stand up to him. One evening after Jack had gone to his office, Michael came to me. He looked at me with the same worry I had seen in his eyes over the past few days. He couldn't bear watching me suffer any longer, and his eyes spoke of his readiness to do anything to help me. "Why don't we just leave?" he asked quietly, holding my hand. There was hope in his voice, a belief that this could be the solution to all our problems. He believed that together we could start over, far away from this nightmare. But his proposal felt too unreal. I knew it would only make things worse. We couldn't just run away. It wouldn't solve the problem. It would only complicate it further. I looked at Michael and shook my head. "I can't," I whispered. "That would only make things worse. Jack will find us. He'll never let us go." I saw Michael clench his fists, understanding that he was powerless to change anything. He wanted to help, but like me, he was trapped in this situation, and we were both caught in a web with no way out. Every day became a new trial. Jack continued his game, creating the illusion that Michael and I could walk away from him. But in reality, he was pulling us deeper into his trap. It was as if he took pleasure in it, in his ability to control our lives as if we were puppets in his hands. He skillfully manipulated our emotions, making us believe there was a way out. But every time we tried to take a step toward freedom, Jack found a way to pull us back. Sometimes it felt like he even allowed us to feel a sliver of hope. He would let Michael and me drift a step away from him, as if giving us the opportunity to escape this nightmare. But at the very last moment, he would pull us back. His manipulations were so subtle that I didn't realize how deeply we were caught in his game. It felt like psychological warfare, where we could always feel his presence, even when he wasn't around. Michael tried to resist. He tried to convince me that we could leave, that Jack wouldn't be able to stop us. But his own fears and guilt wouldn't let him take that decisive step. I saw how he was tormented, torn between his desire to help me and the realization that he, too, had become part of this nightmare. Our relationship had turned into a toxic triangle, where no one could come out victorious. We were caught in a game with no way out. With each new attempt to break free, I felt like I was losing control over my life. Everything that had once seemed important to me was now subject to Jack and his desires. He controlled not only my actions, but also my thoughts and decisions. I could no longer make decisions on my own. Every step I took was accompanied by thoughts of how Jack would perceive it, and what he would do if he realized I was trying to escape his grasp. Michael was just as bound by these chains as I was, and every time he tried to break free, Jack found a way to pull him back, reminding him of his guilt and how he had destroyed our family. We were both prisoners, and there was no way out of this triangle. My life would never be the same again. That was the only thing I knew for certain. Every day, waking up, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman I once was. I could no longer say I made my own decisions. All my thoughts, actions, and words were under Jack's control. He continued to skillfully manipulate me, turning every step I took into a struggle against myself. Even my attempts to find some freedom were doomed to fail. Jack, like a spider, spun his web, and Michael and I were getting more and more entangled in it. On the outside, everything appeared normal. People saw a successful couple, a house in order. But inside that house, there was no trace of normalcy left. I understood that I would never be free, that every step I took would be governed by the fear of what Jack might do. And I couldn't shake that fear. Michael, too, realized that he had become part of this game. It was hard for him to watch Jack control our lives, but he couldn't find the strength to leave for good. He tried to find a way out, to offer solutions, but they all seemed like illusions. We were both stuck in this situation, and each new day only brought more chaos and helplessness. Michael talked about escaping, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Even if we left, Jack's shadow would always follow us. Our triangle had turned into a prison for all three of us. Despite all of Jack's forgiveness, he had no intention of letting us go. His control was too strong, and our helplessness was too deep. In this game, we were all prisoners of our emotions, our decisions, and our mistakes. My world had collapsed. Everything that once mattered now felt hollow. I couldn't hope for a normal future anymore. It disappeared the moment I stepped onto this path. Michael was my reflection, that part of me that was also trapped in this web. We were both captives, and I couldn't see a way out. Would there be an escape? Would I ever regain control over my life? Or would I remain stuck in this triangle until I lost everything? There was no answer to these questions. The story ended with uncertainty, a feeling that we were trapped in an endless cycle of emotions and decisions that could never be undone.